Why couldn't those who killed Yu Menglong simply let him go? He was just a singer, just an actor, someone who almost perfectly aligned with the official image of positive energy and mainstream values. From his debut to his death, he neither rebelled nor was he ever associated with any moral scandal. So why, from the moment he debuted in 2013, was he gradually pushed toward that early morning of September 10th, 2025, hung upside down outside a fifth-floor window, screaming, "I've been threatened by you since I was 25, before being thrown down"? There is only one explanation that holds together logically. He must have known something, and it was the kind of secret worth killing to keep buried. In this episode, we revisit Yu Menglong's career trajectory and the publicly verifiable anomalies in his life, attempting to assemble a coherent explanation. Two details stand out as especially critical. First, in January 2018, his original fan club, organically formed since his debut, was forcibly disbanded by his agency on dubious grounds, with threats of legal action to ensure compliance. What had been a spontaneous support network was replaced by a fan club under the full control of his agent and the authorities behind it. With that, Yu Menglong lost his strongest protection, his key leverage against EE media, and a vital channel for influencing public opinion. Second, in the final 3 years of his life, his assistant was replaced by Du Qiang. From behavioral patterns to personal demeanor, this individual appeared far more like a 24-hour monitor than a conventional assistant. During this period, Yu Menglong was repeatedly seen with unexplained bruises and displayed clear signs of stress in Du Qiang's presence, indications consistent with prolonged pressure and possible abuse. But even these elements do not complete the picture. After his death, the official explanation of an accidental fall was so unconvincing that it was widely dismissed. As for why he was killed, multiple explanations have circulated. The most extreme is the so-called sacrifice theory. We have already addressed and rejected this, so we will not revisit it here. Beyond that, several other theories have gained traction since the early days of the incident. One suggests he refused unspoken industry demands. Another claims he knew too much about money laundering. A third points to a figure named Xin Qi, said to possess extraordinary influence. These explanations are not without plausibility. In the early stages, when fewer pieces of information were available, we also considered them and attempted to build a logical framework around them. But none of them fully answer the central question: why did he have to be killed? Even when adding the motive of deterring the industry, something essential still feels missing, like a critical piece of the puzzle that has yet to be placed. At this point, one thing needs to be clarified. These explanations are likely not entirely false. Precisely because they contain elements of truth, they function effectively as cover, offering just enough plausibility to explain certain aspects, while preventing deeper inquiry into more dangerous territory. But they are not the whole story. They may not even be the main reason. So what is the real cause? That is the question this episode will attempt to answer. I've been threatened by you since I was 25. This was the last clue Yu Menglong left behind. So let us return to the year he turned 25, 2013, and retrace the known major events in chronological order. In 2013, at age 25, Yu Menglong debuted through the Happy Boys talent show. He then followed EE Media's arrangements and shifted from singing to acting, essentially starting over on a slow track. He once said on a variety show that he felt completely negated, and a colleague warned him that the company would never make him a star. These likely took place in the early stage of his career, during the transition from singer to actor. In 2015, he starred in the web drama Go Princess Go, re-entering the public eye as an actor. In 2016, he appeared in Eternal Love, which became a massive hit and brought him broader recognition. From these works and his later roles, it is clear the company positioned him primarily in costume and modern idol dramas, targeting a young female audience. In early 2017, he released his self-titled album Menglong. That same year, with the establishment of Shanghai Qimeng and an increase in registered capital from just 500 RMB in his first company, Dongyang Shanmeng, to 5 million RMB, he now had 2 studios under his name. In September, Shanghai Qimeng registered his name as a Class 13 trademark, firearms and fireworks. By then, the Qiao Renliang case had already taken place about a year earlier. In January 2018, his original fan club, active since his debut, was forcibly disbanded by the agency on dubious grounds, with legal threats used to enforce it. From then on, the once organic support network collapsed, replaced by a fan club fully controlled by external forces. Menglong lost his strongest protective layer, his key bargaining chip against EE media, and an important lever over public opinion. On June 15, 2018, during a birthday event organized by fans, he fell silent and broke down in tears when asked about his future. The event was live-streamed, allowing interaction with fans, but also, objectively, enabling real-time monitoring. Around this time, individuals other than his longtime assistant Da Peng began appearing around him, suggesting the introduction of surveillance. In 2019, he was repeatedly photographed with unfamiliar staff members. Even when Da Peng was present, others were always nearby, indicating that monitoring had become normalized. In May, he was filmed crying at the airport, accompanied by 2 unknown staff members, with Da Peng absent. In June 2020, in a Ralph Lauren advertisement, he mentioned staying up all night and spoke about life and death in the context of the pandemic. We have previously noted that, while the pandemic caused widespread loss, such reflections are uncommon in the language of young people. On June 17th, Da Peng posted on Weibo, noting that promising opportunities often inexplicably disappeared once they attempted to reach us through the company. A statement that suggests resource suppression by EE media and indicates clear signs of restriction. On October 7, 2020, he posted on Weibo, "Please, can you stop following me? I'm really scared." But within minutes, the narrative shifted. Across the internet, a unified explanation took hold. It was simply obsessive fans stalking him. The response was swift, emerging in as little as 10 minutes and no later than 47. The speed was striking, as was the level of control. This was no ordinary reaction. It appeared to have triggered a coordinated opinion management mechanism operating behind and above EE media. Meanwhile, Da Peng, still his assistant until at least late 2021, stopped updating his Weibo after October 11, 2020, with his previous post in August. This suggests Menglong's social media accounts were likely no longer fully under his control, and that Da Peng was barred from posting about him. The outburst likely triggered a higher risk classification. On October 17, 2020, at the Lanvin Shanghai Fashion Show, a brief exchange between 2 attendees was accidentally recorded by a fan. While the first speaker was unclear, the second voice was distinct. Menglong is going to be in trouble, followed by, "He's pretty good, damn it." The exchange implied that the force determining his fate was perceived as unavoidable. From late 2020 to early 2021, during Shine, Super Brothers, he joked in an interview that the contract had been signed without his knowledge. Frequent travel between Shanghai and Hengdian affected his performance, leading to heavy online criticism. From the second half of 2021 to early 2022, Although his contract with EE Media technically expired in August 2021, his work arrangements remained largely unchanged, likely due to ongoing commitments in which EE Media still held a stake until he signed with Blue Media in 2022. After that, his workload declined sharply. Over the next 3 years, his limited TV exposure came almost exclusively through gala appearances on China's state broadcaster, CCTV. While CCTV carries considerable prestige, its audience tends to be older and less likely to amplify content through secondary channels, further constraining his overall visibility. At the same time, its closed and tightly managed system implies stricter control over artists. Between late 2022 and early 2023, his assistant was quietly replaced by Du Chang. From that point, he was rarely seen without this one individual, someone who resembled a full-time monitor more than a traditional assistant. Following Du Chang's arrival, Yu Menglong repeatedly appeared with unexplained bruises and showed unmistakable signs of stress in his presence. These details suggest that the level of control had escalated, with external contact placed under strict supervision. As the executor of this monitoring, Du Chang likely faced severe consequences for failure, and may have been incentivized to use violence, contributing to its normalization. In April 2024, he was filmed wearing an unidentified object on his ankle. Around the same time, a Xiao Hongshu video about electronic anklets included a comment. "Xu Xian is wearing one now. You know what I mean." Yu Menglong had previously played Xu Xian in the new legend of Madam White Snake. In the second half of 2024, he participated in the stage play tour of Parasite. With performances limited to theatre audiences and strict recording bans, his exposure decreased further. In leaked footage, whether during rehearsals, celebrations, or audience signings, Du Chang was always present, and even physically pulled him away during interactions, clearly restricting contact. On August 13, 2025, his final public appearance, he appeared emotionally unstable, seemingly aware of what was coming. He suppressed his emotions throughout and showed no positive interaction with fans. In the early morning of September 10, 2025, he was hung upside down outside a fifth-floor window, shouted, "I've been threatened by you since I was 25, and was then thrown down. Several hours later, at dawn, he was taken back upstairs and ultimately killed. Across these 12 years, the events of Yu Menglong's life trace a clear trajectory. From 2013 to 2025, suppression, threats, surveillance, and eventual elimination unfolded step by step, escalating in intensity with unmistakable signs of premeditation, like a carefully executed procedural system. We once believed that Yu Menglong's death resulted from a punishment spiraling out of control. But perhaps even that assumption was too lenient, still imagining the power behind the scenes as restrained. In reality, when it comes to achieving its objectives, it has never hesitated to kill. That is its fundamental logic. From the moment it emerged over a century ago, this element of terror has been built into its very structure. So now let us examine one by one why the widely circulated explanations, as well as our earlier conclusions, are insufficient to explain Yu Menglong's death. First, money laundering. Money laundering is practically an open secret in the entertainment industry. If an individual artist becomes aware of it or refuses to participate, the usual consequence is, at most, being shelved or having resources cut off. There is no need for 12 years of escalating threats. If the artist refuses to cooperate, the solution is simple. Stop using his studio for laundering and cut off his access to resources. We believe Yu Menglong's studio account was most likely not used for laundering. Even if it was, the scale would hardly reach a level that necessitates silencing by death. In earlier reasoning, we attempted to elevate this to a state-level operation in order to account for the secrecy involved. But the problem remains. Even under that assumption, for an artist who had long been suppressed and never reached top-tier status, the volume of funds routed through him would not be significant enough to justify elimination. In short, money laundering cannot explain why he had to be killed. Second, unspoken rules. They are called rules precisely because they are widespread, and the consequences for refusing them are well established: marginalization, shelving, and deprivation of resources. This explanation has repeatedly surfaced in this case, that he refused certain demands from a female investor and was therefore suppressed. At best, it accounts for the decline in his resources after 2020, coinciding with the turning point following his Weibo outburst. But it cannot explain the forced disbandment of his fan club in 2018, the sustained, high-intensity surveillance in the years that followed, or, most strikingly, his death. Simply put, the logic of retaliation in such cases is exclusion. What Menglong experienced went far beyond exclusion. It included systematic control and ultimately elimination. The scale and nature are fundamentally different. Third, knowledge of Xinqi's sensitive identity. After the incident, Xinqi's personal information and online traces were rapidly erased. This does suggest that his identity may have been sensitive. We previously speculated that Menglong's fate might be tied to knowing this identity while refusing to enter into a dependent relationship. However, so-called identity information, especially when unverifiable and sourced from a single channel, is merely intelligence. Without independent verification, its credibility to outsiders remains low. For this level of risk, there are already well-established methods: silencing, career destruction, professional suppression, or even fabricated cases to create deterrence. There is no need for a prolonged, resource-intensive surveillance system, let alone elimination. A comparison can be made with the Niu Tengyu case. In 2019, information about Xi Mingze was exposed through JinaWiki. Because the primary actors were overseas, Niu Tengyu, a maintainer of SWiki, appears to have been used as a scapegoat, likely for deterrent purposes. The 14-year sentence suggests it was deemed sufficient to kill the chicken to scare the monkeys. More importantly, during Menglong's lifetime, especially in the final 3 years under strict control, Xinqi's identity was not systematically erased. Meanwhile, individuals with similarly sensitive backgrounds have not disappeared. Rather, they continue to operate openly within certain circles. For example, Kai Yijia's background is widely rumored within the industry. If Xinqi's identity was already known within such circles, then Menglong simply becoming one additional non-compliant variable would not logically justify execution. Unless the issue lies deeper. Unless what he encountered was not merely a person's background, but a structure, a system of operation that must not be exposed. If what Menglong came to understand was such a mechanism, and he still refused to comply, then he ceased to be someone who could be managed through suppression alone. He became a liability, a risk that could not be contained. Only under this premise does the pattern we observe, long-term, high-intensity control culminating in elimination, begin to make sense. At this point, only one explanation remains that can fully connect all of these anomalies. Within the Chinese entertainment industry, there likely exists a systematic control mechanism centered on what can be described as bloodbinding, that is, binding individuals through forced complicity. Let us tentatively refer to the inner circle that operates this mechanism as the blood chamber. Its rules resemble those of a closed criminal organization. Entry is one way, there is no exit. Unless one belongs to the red elite, entry requires becoming complicit, staining one's hands with blood. Even passive awareness of its existence is enough to trigger forced inclusion. Binding is achieved through obedience and participation. Those who know but refuse to bind are eliminated. Cases like Chao Renliang's death function as living warnings of intimidation, ensuring that even indirect awareness carries irreversible consequences. Viewed through this lens, many of the previously disconnected abnormalities in Menglong's experience begin to form a coherent and deeply disturbing pattern. The early unspoken rules pressure he faced was likely only the first stage of a screening mechanism, an obedience test. As he continued to refuse, the intensity escalated. At some point, he was either explicitly informed or forced to piece together, through escalating threats, the outline of this inner circle and the logic of bloodbinding. This moment of realization likely came in the second half of 2017. In the first half of that year, Eternal Love became a major success, significantly raising his visibility and commercial value. By September, his name had been registered as a trademark in the firearms and fireworks category, suggesting he had already entered the other side's target range. At this stage, after repeated failed attempts to recruit him, the approach likely shifted. Increased incentives paired with overt threats, designed to force compliance. And to reinforce the intimidation, it is possible that materials related to Chao Renliang's death were shown to him directly. At that point, Menglong faced a stark binary: comply and gain access to resources, or refuse and risk destruction. He chose to refuse. It is possible he attempted to negotiate, offering silence or proposing to exit the industry in exchange for safety. But within such a system, knowing without obeying already constitutes an unacceptable risk. From that point on, he would have been viewed less as a recruitable target than as an uncontrollable liability. What followed was a predictable escalation: stronger threats, tighter control, and systematic isolation to prevent any leakage of information. The forced disbandment of his fan club in January 2018 can be understood as the first major step in cutting off his external support system and reducing the risk of dissemination. Meanwhile, the reinforcement of personnel around him suggests a sustained state of heightened alert. It is possible that, at this stage, the inner circle was still attempting to draw him in, applying greater pressure and offering stronger incentives until he could no longer endure it. By October 2020, after prolonged surveillance and psychological pressure, his defenses appear to have collapsed. His public post, "Please, can you stop following me? I'm really scared," was a moment of visible rupture. The speed and uniformity of the response that followed revealed just how seriously this loss of control was treated. From that point on, his classification likely escalated further, from an uncontrollable risk to a ticking time bomb that had to be resolved. Everything that followed, continued monitoring, resource deprivation, physical isolation, and ultimately elimination, fits into a consistent execution trajectory. His final words, shouted while hanging outside the window in 2025, "I've been threatened by you since I was 25, stand as a direct accusation against this long-term system of coercion. It is also important to note that his death was not only an endpoint, but part of an ongoing process. Within this framework, elimination serves a dual function, removing risk while reinforcing the system itself. Each such case becomes both a conclusion and a new act of binding. Within this structure, certain individuals may occupy different levels of involvement. Fang Li, Chengqing Song, Zhou Hao, and Yi Shu are suspected to operate at higher levels of the blood chamber, while others, particularly newer entrants such as Fan Shiki, Jiao Maiki, Song Yiren, and Wu Yaotao, exist at the execution layer. For newer members, the system offers both heightened marginal incentives and risks, access to resources on one hand and greater exposure and expendability on the other. In critical moments, they may function as buffers, absorbing responsibility and shielding the core of power. In this sense, the entire sequence of events follows a predetermined logic from beginning to end. Explanations such as money laundering or unspoken rules are not necessarily false, but they are incomplete. At most, they describe surface-level phenomena. At worst, they function as convenient cover, obscuring the deeper structure beneath. However, this mechanism did not originate with Xi Jinping. After taking power, Mao Zedong launched a series of political campaigns, including land reform and the suppression of counter-revolutionaries. While their targets differed, the former aimed at so-called landlords, the latter at so-called capitalists and reactionaries, their underlying logic was highly isomorphic. Going further back, we see the 1930s Jiangxi Anti-Bolshevik League campaign, also known as the Anti-AB League campaign, and the 1940s Yan'an rectification movement, each aimed at disciplining and consolidating control over military and party ranks, respectively. In every case, the initiator was Mao Zedong. The CCP's tightly knit organizational structure, combined with its totalitarian mode of rule, provided fertile ground for figures like Mao to fully amplify this kind of structural violence. As we have mentioned many times, Xi Jinping can be seen as Mao's good student. He has clearly absorbed this entire set of governing techniques. While he has not applied them on the same nationwide scale, similar patterns have already become visible. In recent years, he has repeatedly emphasized the Feng Qiao experience, whose core principle is to mobilize the masses to monitor and report on one another, horizontally severing social ties and continuously atomizing individuals. Within such a structure, people at the grassroots level are locked into mutual surveillance and mutual harm, while the true center of power maintains control at minimal cost, gaining even greater room for manipulation. If this dynamic is not yet obvious at the broader social level, it becomes far more visible in domains where power and influence are concentrated, such as officialdom and the entertainment industry. In the Xi Jinping era, these sectors have increasingly functioned as testing grounds for more intensive forms of control. If this assessment seems exaggerated, consider the following real conversation. And during the Cultural Revolution, Ji Dengui, who was rapidly promoted by Mao, once recounted to his son Ji Pomin an experience from 1951. Ji Pomin later disclosed it in a 2005 interview with Ta Kung-pao. The account is as follows. In his son's view, Ji Dengui was not particularly suited for politics, yet he earned Mao Zedong's favor in the early years following the founding of the People's Republic of China. Ji Pomin recalled that his father's first private conversation with Mao took place in the early 1950s, when Mao was touring Henan and summoned the party secretary of the Xuchang Prefectural Committee to report on local conditions. Decades later, Ji Dengui described that conversation as heart-stopping. After hearing the report aboard his train, Mao suddenly asked, "Have you ever been purged?" "Yes." "How many times?" "Twice." "Were those purges justified?" "No." Ji Dengui later said that Mao then made a remark that stayed with him. "A cadre who has never been purged does not count." Then came a series of increasingly pointed questions. "Have you purged others?" "Yes." "Did you ever purge anyone wrongly?" "Yes." "Have you killed anyone?" "Yes." "Did you ever kill anyone wrongly?" "Yes, some were wrongly killed." Ji Pomin explained that during the late Liberation War and the early years of the PRC, campaigns such as bandit suppression, anti-oppressor movements, and the suppression of counter-revolutionaries meant that almost all cadres had participated in executions, and inevitably, some of those executions were mistaken. It was precisely this kind of honest answer that left a strong impression on Mao. Thereafter, whenever Mao toured Henan, he would specifically request Ji Dengqui's reports. By the time of the Cultural Revolution, he even referred to him as an old friend. This conversation offers a revealing window into Mao Zedong's logic of selecting and trusting officials. Those who had been repeatedly purged were considered disciplined, tamed by the system. Those who had in turn purged and killed others were seen as deeply bound to it. This form of binding was not merely political, it operated on psychological and practical levels as well, rooted in shared risk and complicity. Placed within a broader historical context, it becomes easier to understand why cycles of purging and killing recurred throughout the Mao era and gradually became institutionalized. And these were not just political campaigns, they also functioned as mechanisms of selection and binding. In fact, this governing logic can be traced back as early as the 1920s, when Mao mobilized the peasant movements in Hunan. Seen in this light, it is hardly surprising that Xi Jinping, often described as Mao Zedong's good student, would adopt similar methods, particularly given the stain-binding techniques of the Jiang Zemin era. This is exemplified by Zhao Wei, whose image was tarnished by widely circulated photos of her in an outfit resembling the Japanese army flag, a major 2001 scandal that has continued to follow her. When examined closely, however, every sign points to premeditation. How do we explain the statement in the video, likely from the transfer to Sunshine Upper East, that he won't die? There are two possibilities. The first possibility, they genuinely did not intend to kill him at that moment. Over the previous 3 years, under Du Qiang's close surveillance, Menglong had shown no clear signs of resistance or information leakage. The event was likely planned as a torture session, to break his will and tarnish his image, as we speculated earlier. But during the assault, he suddenly swallowed a USB device at the scene. If the money laundering theory is excluded, this USB was probably not something he had prepared in advance, but rather belonged to one of the perpetrators or the owner of the location. In a moment of extreme desperation, with no other means of resistance, he may have resorted to this drastic act in an attempt to force them to stop. It is human nature to judge others by one's own standards. Menglong, by all accounts a gentle person, may have believed that swallowing the USB device would create enough risk to make them panic and take him to a hospital. Yet he gravely misunderstood the situation. What he did not realize was this: even if his death was not the primary objective, it had already been included within the range of acceptable outcomes. The second possibility, the statement was a deliberate smokescreen aimed at outsiders. If they were seen during the transfer and a passerby reacted, "You're going to kill him like this," the perpetrators would almost instinctively respond, "He won't die," to diffuse suspicion and prevent intervention. This explanation aligns with earlier accounts from the director of Yu's last drama, A Love Story of Oiled Paper Umbrella, and from Wang Yuchen, a screenwriter at EE Media, as well as the deliberate choice of a blood moon night, symbolically associated with killing. More importantly, it lays the groundwork for the official narrative. Once the claim of no intent to kill is established, the death can later be framed as an accident or a personal act. For instance, it could be claimed that Menglong, unable to endure the violence, chose to end his life, or that he accidentally fell while trying to escape. In this way, what was in reality a killing could be repackaged as suicide or misadventure. Of course, all of the above reasoning rests on the assumption of a bloodbinding or forced complicity mechanism. How accurately this framework reflects reality is ultimately for each viewer to decide. Looking back on the past 6 months of exploration, it has been a dark and difficult journey. Several times, we thought we were close to an answer, only to find a more compelling explanation just beyond reach. This process of gradual discovery, questioning, revising, and refining is at the heart of scientific inquiry. As we have said before, genuine exploration advances step by step, constantly re-examining and overturning earlier assumptions. In this way, we have gradually built upon what we knew, arriving at deeper layers of understanding and uncovering darker realities. But when we first set out months ago, driven by unanswered questions, we never expected to arrive at a conclusion like this. For now, it seems unlikely that a fundamentally new answer will emerge in the near term. When progress on Menglong's case stalled, we turned to a deeper look at the Chao Renliang case and produced a video. We suspected the two cases shared an underlying logic and could illuminate each other. In hindsight, we were right. We have emphasized repeatedly, any answer claiming absolute certainty from the outset is, by nature, anti-scientific. Such claims are often encouraged by the perpetrators themselves, who rely on countless smokescreens. The key difference between scientific reasoning and metaphysical assertion is this: one constantly self-corrects, while the other presents itself as absolute truth. In the end, it is up to each of you to judge how close our conclusions come to the truth. Your own reasoning and critical thinking are the final measure. If this episode has helped clarify some doubts, feel free to share it with others. We aim to expose the CCP's most hidden and dangerous mechanisms of power so more people can see the anti-human nature of its totalitarian rule and why it holds no true legitimacy.